Senate Budget Subcommittee number 1 on education. We've got several topics we're going to be discussing today. First, there will be a vote only on a categorical program consolidation, which was discussed in depth at last week's meeting. Then we will take up issues on K-14 mandates, where after we discuss that issue, we will have public comment. Then there will be a vote on the issue. We'll then move to Prop 39 discussion. Don't anticipate any votes. We move then to school facilities programs, which you'll notice in the agenda, there's a recommendation made to vote. It looks like we will not. It looks like we'll be holding that item over. Then we'll be going to emergency repair program, which is also not a voting item. And finally, an information item, home to school transportation. At the end of the agenda, anything we vote on, we will have public comment before we vote. Items that don't have a vote, if you wish to comment, they'll come at the end of the agenda. Okay? Again, first we'll move to the vote-only item that we heard last week, and I'll ask staff to read the recommendation.
The staff recommendation is to affirm the rejection of the governor's proposal to include agricultural education grants and specialized secondary programs funds within the LCFF and approve these as separate categorical programs maintaining their current funding levels.
Okay, again, would maintain them as categorical programs as they are now. Before we move to the vote on that item, though, let's do a roll call.
Senator Block?
Here.
Senator Liu?
Here.
Senator Weiland?
Okay, we now have a quorum, so let's move to a vote on the item just read by Steph.
Senator Block?
Aye.
Senator Liu?
Aye.
Senator Weiland?
Please show that passing 2-0. We'll hold the item open for Mr. Weiland should he care to add on. We now move to what will likely be the only voting item today, which is K-12 mandates, issue number 1. And I'd like to invite up Department of Finance, Department of Education, the Chancellor's Office, and the LAO. And let's begin with Finance, your recommendation regarding K-14 mandates.
Thank you. Keith Nizam, Department of Finance. The governor's budget addresses 4 of the 7 new mandates that had a statewide cost estimate provided by the commission. 3 of the mandates are being added into the traditional reimbursement process and the mandate block grant, and 1 is being proposed for repeal.
Okay, let's move to Department of Education. How do you feel about that proposal?
In regards to the governor's proposal, we support moving all of the mandates into the block grant. We do have some concerns with some of the LAO's proposals about some of the additional mandates. I can address that now or after the LAO's presentation.
After the LAO, you can address that, but make sure we don't forget you. Chancellor's Office.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Members, Dan Troy, Vice Chancellor of Fiscal Policy at the California Community College Chancellor's Office. We have no objections to the governor's proposal to move the public contracts mandate into the block grant and to repeal the community college construction mandate. We also would not have any objection to the LEO's recommendation, which I think we'll hear from in a minute, to repeal the public contracts mandate. There's some other issues regarding mandates that I'd like to address, but perhaps we can wait till after the LEO's.
Okay, we'll hear from LAO, then we'll go back to Department of Ed and Chancellor.
Thank you.
LAO.
Paul Glozewski with the LAO. You should have a handout in front of you from which I'll be speaking. I'll go rather briefly through some of the background about mandates and just highlight some changes that the state has made recently in terms of the way that it pays for education mandates. So traditionally, the state has paid for mandates through what's known as the claims process, whereby LEAs document in detail the cost for the mandate and submit it to the state controller. The state controller reviews the claims and pays them. And if you look on page 2, we've highlighted over the years a number of problems with this process. In terms of the lack of efficiency, the reimbursement rates, variation in reimbursement rates across LEAs, and just the cumbersome administrative nature of it. So if you turn to page 3, I'll talk a little bit about some changes the state has made in recent years to make the process simpler. One change the state made in 2004 was to create a new reimbursement process that's called a reasonable reimbursement methodology, or an RRM. And the RRM essentially is, instead of submitting claims for actual costs, an LEA can propose a formula that approximates costs to make it simpler. The Department of Finance could also propose it, or any effective state agency. This process has not been used very often since it was created in 2004, and there's only 3 RRMs that have been approved by the Commission on State Mandates. And it's often been a source of great friction between the state and LEAs over the RRMs. If you go to page 4, I'll talk about the block grant that the state created in the 2012-13 budget to also simplify payments for education mandates. Unlike the RRM, which applies to one particular mandate, the block grant includes all mandates, and funding is provided on an ADA basis for LEAs for all mandates included in the block grant. LEAs still have the option to go through the traditional claims process, or they can take the block grant, but they cannot take both. And as you see in the figure on page 4, the overwhelming majority of LEAs have chosen to participate in the block grant. About 95% of ADA for the associated LEAs are going through the block grant now. So on page 5, we have some recommendations to further streamline the funding process for mandates. And the first recommendation is to repeal the RM process. We feel that the block grant has largely superseded the reason for the RM, and we feel that the RM process has not worked very well, as I mentioned. And we think that the block grant has been more successful. And our other recommendations concern how to adjust funding for the block grant moving forward. One would be to apply a cost of living increase to the block grant so that LEAs will continue to participate in it in the future, even as costs increase. And the other would be to adjust block grant funding for new mandates when there are significant costs associated with those mandates. If you go to page 6, I'll turn to the governor's proposal now. As you heard from the Department of Finance, the Commission on State Mandates approved 7 new mandates. His proposal only includes 4 of them, and so I'll focus mainly on those 4, but we do have recommendations on the other 3 as well. The first mandate is known as the Uniform Complaint Procedures Mandate, and that mandate requires school districts to adopt and publish complaint procedures, provide certain notifications about complaint procedures, and sets a process in place for referring complaint procedures. We generally think that this mandate is important for accountability reasons for students and staff and others to be able to complain. However, we did have some suggestions to improve the process by which appeals are referred to the Department of Ed, and in one other area as well for that mandate. But otherwise, we're recommending that you keep that mandate and add it to the block grant. The charter schools mandate is largely an extension of an existing mandate that requires charter authorizers to review charter petitions, certain information that's included in petitions. Generally, overall, we think that many of the activities in this mandate are worthwhile and worth keeping. However, we did recommend eliminating a few of the activities in the mandate, one which requires county offices to verify the mathematical accuracy of certain statement provided to them. We understand that it's just no longer necessary in the age of computers to have this requirement. And there are 2 other activities that we had recommended eliminating as well on that one. On the public contracts mandate, this mandate requires, this one applies to both schools and community colleges, and it requires in certain circumstances for them to contract out for certain projects. We do not think that the state needs to mandate that LEAs contract out in these circumstances. We think that LEAs could decide for themselves whether it's more appropriate to use in-house staff or contract out. So we recommend repealing that mandate. And the last mandate in the governor's budget, the community construction mandate, which the governor proposes to repeal, we also recommend repealing that mandate. It requires community college districts to submit certain information to the chancellor's office about their capital plans. And we think that the state does not need to mandate this because the districts most likely would provide the information voluntarily.
Thank you. So we have the governor's proposal, we have the LAO's counter proposal or their response to the governor's proposal. And I guess we should also note that the staff recommendation here would be to adopt the governor's proposal regarding the uniform complaint procedures mandate, the charter school mandate, and the public contracts mandate, putting them into a block grant without additional funding, and then adopt the governor's proposal to repeal the community college construction mandate. So with those as the staff recommendations and hearing the two proposals, let's hear first Department of Education and then Chancellor's Office.
So I'll just say that we support the staff's proposal to basically adopt the governor's budget proposal. Moving on then to the three mandates that are not in the governor's budget, particularly the parental involvement mandate. Our concern is that while we are also hopeful that the LCAPs will address this process, we do think it's too early to determine that. And given that parental involvement is such an important part of the process we're now moving to, we would just suggest rolling that into the mandate block grant at this time. In regards to the Williams mandate, once again, it's the same concern. We're concerned that the LCAP may we believe the LCAP may ultimately address these concerns, but given that it's the implementation of a legal settlement, we do think that we should continue just to roll that into the mandate block grant. And we do agree with the LAO and don't have any concerns about repealing the developer fee mandate.
Okay. I'd ask the Department of Finance to respond to those three issues, parent involvement, Williams mandate. Why has the governor decided not to include those as mandates in the block grant?
So a couple of those were related to timing of the finalization of the statewide cost estimates. They were not completed in time for the governor's budget, so we plan to address those in the May revision.
Okay.
And the other one, same thing, we'll address it in the May revision.
Okay, so the staff recommendation that takes care of the other mandates, we could go forward with now and just hold over on that. That would apparently be satisfactory to the two of you. And community colleges.
Yes, again, no objection to the staff recommendation, but I would like to point out the LEO mentioned the notion of adding some COLA to the block grant or some way of assessing the increase in costs over time to increase the block grant reimbursement. We think that some method of doing that would be appropriate. We note that about 85% of costs at community colleges, and probably similar percentage at K-12, goes into personnel costs. That is the chief driver of costs of the mandate process. So it does seem reasonable that over time, at a minimum, a COLA should be applied to the block grant, if not some other process to assess the relative increase in costs. One issue in your agenda I did want to address was there's a question as to whether the broad participation in the block grant indicates universal satisfaction with it. And I do want to say that I think that can be overstated a little bit because it's not really a clean choice for districts right now. Because if they go through the reimbursement process, it may be many years before they see any repayment for those activities, and it's often the controller will disallow a lot of the claims as well. So right now, districts are confronted with the choice of whether to get some money at all for the block grants right away, or to wait sometimes 6-7 years to get any repayment at all.
But isn't that intrinsic in the choice between those two styles, one of which requests have to be made and then wait, as opposed to one where you get the money?
Well, I think if the state were in the process of repaying the actual reimbursement on an annual basis, I think you would probably see fewer districts opting for the block grant because they're getting, on the whole, I think, less money through the block grant than they would through the reimbursement process. But the state defers those payments.
Okay. I've got one question, then maybe Senator Liu has questions. This is for the Department of Finance. The governor's paying down or proposing paying down all sorts of obligations, speeding up payment of deferrals. But the mandates, there's not a move to pay mandates. Why is that?
So while deferrals impact nearly all LEAs, they have a disproportionate impact on lower wealth LEAs that receive a majority of their funding from the state versus their own local revenues. So because of this, we feel that paying the deferrals sooner than the mandate backlog payments would be a greater benefit to the state. The mandate backlog payments benefit the relatively few LEAs that actually file for mandate reimbursements, while, as I stated earlier, the deferral payments are kind of a broader benefit that benefit almost every LEA. But the administration is committed to, paying down all components of the wall of debt. It's just that the deferrals are a higher priority at this point.
Would it make any sense, be practically possible for a given LEA to request that mandate backlog be paid back versus deferral payback with the same dollars?
At this point, the governor's budget doesn't have a payment process in place for the mandate backlog. So, if a request was submitted, that's not part of the governor's proposal.
Does the Department of Education have any thoughts on that? I have districts in my Senate district, some that like the deferral payback, and others they're saying it really doesn't do them a whole lot of good. They'd rather get the mandates.
So we have not explored that option currently. I think that it would be some additional work for the department because it goes out on an apportionment basis, but I'll have to follow back up with the committee on that.
Okay, thank you. Appreciate it. Any other comments from the panel on that issue? Okay, if not, I think we will move to public comment on this issue, and then we will move to a vote. So I will thank and excuse the panel on this issue. We'll have members of the public come forward. And as always in this committee, with public comment, I ask you to begin by introducing yourself and any organization you represent. And I ask you to limit your public comment to 1 minute, but feel free if you have any more to say to give us written information, either the sergeant today or the committee staff in the future. So let's begin with our first public comment.
Dave Walrath, representing Small School District Association. We do urge you to adopt the LAO's recommendation regarding providing a cost of living adjustment for the reasons that were presented by the Chancellor's Office representative. The second piece is on the uniform complaint procedure. Would request you consider supplemental language, asking for this to be reviewed again in around 2 or 3 years on what the real costs are. Our concern is that under the LCAP, you might have an increase in the number of people choosing to use this procedure to raise issues as to how school districts have chosen to make allocations. And while it's a very minor cost now, it could be a greater cost later. Thank you.
Thank you. Next comment.
Eric Premack, Charter Schools Development Center. We too support the COLA notion. We, though, think that the baseline rates in the block grant are almost ridiculously low. So for like all of the elementary schools, we have several hundred that we represent. They get $14 per ADA per year, which is nowhere near enough to cover the laundry list of requirements that are in there. And we think if the block grant is going to remain, and we think the concept is a good one, that those baseline rates need to be reviewed.
Okay, thank you. Seeing no further public comment on this issue, we'll move to a vote and hold the item open. So I'll ask staff to read the recommendation and call the roll.
Staff's recommendation is to adopt the governor's proposal to add the uniform complaint procedures mandate, charter schools mandate, and public contracts mandate into the mandates block grant without additional funding. In addition, adopt the governor's proposal to repeal the community college constructions mandate. Senator Block?
Aye.
Senator Liu? Senator Weiland?
Okay, please show that sitting at a 1-0 vote. 2 votes required for passage. Senators Liu and Weiland not voting yet. We'll hold the roll open for them to add on. And we'll now move to issue number 2 on Proposition 39 and ask the Prop 39 panel to come forward, which includes Department of Ed, the Chancellor's Office, the LAO, and Finance. And we'll ask Finance to kick it off.
Good afternoon, Cheryl A. Dunn from the Department of Finance. Approved by voters in 2012, the Clean Energy Job Creation Act increased the state corporate tax revenues and requires half of the increased revenues, up to $550 million per year, to be used to support energy efficiency projects. There's an estimated $726 million in total revenues. $363 million will go to K through 12 and community colleges energy efficiency projects. This year's proposal continues with the same Prop 39 construct as last year and allocates $316 million for K through 12, $39 million for California community colleges, $3 million for the Workforce Investment Board, and $5 million for the Conservation Corps. No additional funds are proposed for the ECO revolving loan program, although the administration will continue to monitor the program participation for future funding consideration.
Thank you. Let's go to to education.
Good afternoon, Monique Ramos on behalf of the Department of Education. So Proposition 39 guidelines were adopted last December and posted both on the Department of Education website as well as the Energy Commission's website. They include information on how LEAs can submit expenditure plans to the Energy Commission and how the Department of Education will distribute dollars. As of March of this year, approximately 80% of the $145 million, 80%, which is $145 million of the $179 million, went out in planning grants to about 1,500 LEAs. Approximately 480 LEAs have not applied for a startup grant, and there's about $34 million remaining in planning grant. On April 7th, we went back out for another application period that closed on April 30th, and we will update the committee when we have results of those applications. Of LEAs that have not applied for planning grants, 30% are school districts, 70% are charters, and 85% of all those that have not applied have less than 1,000 ADA. We believe that some districts are not, or some LEAs are not applying because they do not need planning funds. They know the projects they want to work on, so there's just not a need for the planning dollars. Some facilities may not qualify, particularly in charter schools. They could be temporary leased facilities. Some charters have closed or will be closing. And finally, some LEAs just do not have the staff to figure out the Proposition 39 requirements.
Okay, thank you. Community colleges.
Yes, thanks, Mr. Chair. Members, Dan Troy with the Chancellor's Office once again. Because of our unique relationship with districts on facility issues and the longstanding partnership we have worked out between our districts and the IOUs, our office was very well positioned to hit the ground running on Prop 39 projects. Indeed, at this point, we have allocated funding for over 300 projects. Over $39 million to this point has gone out to projects. We actually anticipate that about half of those projects will be fully completed by the end of this fiscal year. So we're very excited to report on that. The dollars have worked out extremely well for our office. To give you a sense of the types of projects that have been done so far, over 50% has gone into lighting. So LED lighting, for example, replacing very old energy inefficient methods of lighting campuses. And we know that that does represent, in most cases, about 30% of a district's utility cost. So that's a very valuable place to go with that money. Another 19% has gone to HVAC, and about 15% has gone to energy control systems. As we move on into future years, we expect to get into more long-term projects, such as monitoring-based commissioning, which is a data-driven system that monitors energy efficiency throughout a campus and can allow districts to immediately set controls where problems arise. So we think that's going to provide a great deal of benefit for the state and for colleges as well. In addition to projects, we did use $6 million of the funding we received this year for workforce development, which was also a key component of Proposition 39. And the bulk of that funding has gone into either professional development or in articulation, or rather curriculum development that will allow trainers to provide training at our campuses to develop a workforce ready to meet energy efficiency goals statewide.
Thank you. Thank you. Leo, any comments?
Just one comment. Each year, the Prop 39 revenues are going to be revised. So in 13-14, the energy efficiency revenues were $464 million, and in 14-15, in January, they're projected to be $363 million. So as the revenues change, there is a choice about how to allocate additional or fewer funds. And in his budget this year, the governor prioritized the grant program for schools. And as you heard, they did not propose adding any more money for the loan program, We think that one thing that you should consider moving forward when you have more information about the loan program and applications is potentially prioritizing that program. The benefit of prioritizing the loan program is that after the 5 years are over, under Prop 39, for these revenues to be used for energy efficiency, a revolving loan program can continue beyond that period, whereas a grant program would just end.
Okay, good, thank you. A couple questions. First, it seems that the community colleges really hit the ground running on this, and the K-12 schools have been much slower in embracing it. Why the difference?
I wouldn't say K-12 is necessarily slower. I think that we just have different systems. So where the community college system has kind of a centralized system, it's up to each LEA to go ahead and prepare for these dollars. And LEAs really didn't know the guidelines for these dollars until December, and then had to turn around the first round of applications in early spring. That's a pretty quick turnaround for an LEA that maybe hasn't really considered energy efficiency before. So we think they're getting up to speed and moving quickly.
I'd also add that the community colleges are exempt from the Energy Commission's program, so they don't have to go through that system, whereas they were developing the guidelines for half of the fiscal year, and then they just started accepting applications about 3 months ago. So that's also another.
And is the Chancellor's Office pleased with the way the community colleges are processing?
Yes, absolutely. And I think as Ms. Ramos suggested, we directly fund districts for facilities projects. So we have a very different relationship with our districts than we don't have the state allocation board process. So we were much more able to get dollars out right away. So the systems just work differently in that regard.
Should the process be different for the two entities, or it doesn't seem like the proposal, last year's proposal, really takes into account the differences between LEAs and community colleges in terms of how dollars are distributed under Prop 39. Should there be some difference? Or that's, go ahead.
I'll just say briefly on our end that we think the process works very well for us, so we do prefer the grant process over the ECA process, but it may be a different answer.
And would there be a better process for education?
I mean, I think at this point the process is up and running. So districts have moved and are in the process of implementation at this point. So I'm not sure that it would be beneficial to change kind of midstream.
Okay. Finance question for you. Do you anticipate that there'll be a change in the May revise in terms of dollars available?
We're still looking into the numbers for May revise, but they'll come up next week and you'll see them for revenues.
Okay, Elio, do you have any thoughts on what May revise might do?
Yes, similarly, we'll have updated numbers at May revise, but one thing to note is that the Proposition 39 revenues can be quite volatile because it depends on a sort of a certain part of the corporation tax. So there could be significant changes year to year, and even from January to May.
Okay, thank you. The recommendation from staff is to hold this open because of the May revised figures that we're awaiting, and we will do that. And again, members of the public comment on this or any other programs will be okay at the end of the session. We'll comment only on those items that are being voted on today after each item, others at the end. So we move on now to the next item on the agenda, which is school facilities program. And anybody who came in after we began, there is a recommendation for a vote on this item in your agenda. However, there are multiple members who have concerns and want to meet and talk about this a little bit. So we will be holding this item over and not taking a vote today. So again, public comment will be at the end on school facilities. And I see the panel is up here on school facilities issues. So let's begin with finance.
For the school facilities program, the budget is a continuation from last year in terms of evaluating the administration's role in facilities financing. The budget summary notes that debt service for general obligation bonds is approximately $2.4 billion annually. The budget summary also discusses some major issues with the current program in that it's overly complex, there's perverse financial incentives that it provides to districts, it doesn't adequately allocate funds to districts that need it the most, and there's a lack of local control for school design and school facilities. A future program should address these issues and avoid an unsustainable reliance on debt issuance. The governor's budget also includes two proposals that provide a combined $400 million for school facilities. First, the budget proposes to dedicate $188.1 million for one-time Prop 98 funds to the Williams settlement through the Emergency Repair Program. Second, the budget proposes to transfer $211 million of remaining bond authority and specialized programs to the core new construction and modernization programs. In addition to the bond authority shift, the proposal specified that any funds that come back to the specialized programs would be available to the core new construction and modernization programs at the discretion of the State Allocation Board. The administration believes that shifting bond authority from the specialized programs to the oversubscribed core new construction and modernization programs will ensure the best and quickest use of the limited bond funds that remain in the school facilities program.
Okay, thank you. Let's move to Department of Education.
Monique Ramos on behalf of State Superintendent of Public Instruction. So the superintendent supports a new school facilities bond this year. 50% of our schools are over 25 years old and 10% are over 75 years old. Assemblymember Buchanan has AB 2235, a bond bill that is currently moving through the process. She has spent the last year and a half with a State Allocation Board subcommittee addressing the concerns about the current program and it not being streamlined enough, and has been working with the field diligently on this bill. And the superintendent feels it's important to get a new program running as soon as possible. Thank you.
Thank you. State Architect?
Yes.
Okay, please introduce yourself and tell us.
Excuse me, yes, Chet Whittam, I'm sorry, I didn't hit that. Chet Whittam, State Architect, and I'm really here to answer any questions in terms of the process that's been going through on the seismic mitigation program. I can give you the statistics. I've handed them to you. If you'd like me to discuss them further, I'm certainly available to do that.
Okay, thank you. And are you with Education?
Yes, I'm Kathleen Moore with the Department of Education, also here to assist and answer questions should they come up.
Okay, thank you. Let's hear then from the LAO.
So we generally agree with the governor's proposal to transfer remaining bond authority from the new from the specialized programs, facility programs, to the new construction and modernization programs. We think it makes sense to try to target available resources where there's the most demand. However, that said, in our review, we did note that some of the specialized programs, there still was demand for the funding, in particular the seismic mitigation program. There's currently over $100 million in applications pending at the Division of State Architect. So we felt that allowing a little more time for some of these applications to be processed would be a reasonable idea, and we were suggesting instead of having bond authority transfer effective July 1st, as under the governor's proposal, we would allow 6 more months and have it take effect January 1st to allow more time for applications to be processed. In addition, we noted that the governor excluded one specialized program for charter school facilities from his proposal to shift remaining bond authority. But there is a large balance in that program of $95 million right now. And we were recommending, similar to how he is treating other specialized programs with remaining bond authority, to transfer the balance for that program as well.
Okay, thank you. A question just for administration. Why a higher priority for funding new construction than for seismic mitigation?
So this proposal is trying to target the limiting remaining authority to the programs, the core programs of new construction and modernization, where there's currently a $400 million waiting list. The seismic program has been undersubscribed for the past almost 8 years, and so while we acknowledge that there are projects in the DSA pipeline, the State Allocation Board has actually made several attempts to be able to help school districts to be able to become more eligible and to move forward with the program and loosen up eligibility. But despite that, they still haven't come forward, and there's remaining bond authority that far exceeds what OPSC, the Office of Public School Construction, has on file. Prior to the seismic program of 2006, projects with seismic issues used to go through the new construction and the modernization program. So they didn't have this process, and so pending that they had the ability to be able to have a new construction and modernization ability, they could potentially use the new construction and modernization dollars as well.
Okay. Why do we think they've not been aggressively pursuing the seismic fund? Is there a sense that the schools are already in good shape seismically, or what's the problem? What's the delay? Does state architect or Department of Education have a response?
I would say that the districts, it varies from district to district, so we're not quite sure what the barriers could possibly be.
Okay, let's hear from state architect.
I agree. We're not quite sure why they're not subscribing to the process. Like, I can tell you right now that we've got 5 buildings pending approval at this particular point, and 2 of those were reviewed by DSA and returned to the district architects for corrections back in May of last year, and we've not had any response from them since that point. And the other 3 were submitted back to the architects in June of last year. However, they are back into back check as we stand now. We've turned out approved buildings, 58 buildings at this particular point, and they seem to be the buildings that were submitted at the very early part of the program. They're not submitting very many at this point. I cannot tell you why.
Does the Department of Ed have an idea?
I'm Kathleen Moore with the California Department of Ed, and I also sit on the State Allocation Board representing the Superintendent of Public Instruction. Twice we have, as a board, taken the seismic program and tried to make it more user-friendly, so to speak. And that most recent time, I don't think has had the opportunity to actually work its way through the system. Districts have to both first get a conceptual approval from the Division of State Architect and that they concur with the seismic mitigation issue, and then they have to come back through for the actual project and dollars. And we actually believe that there are numerous projects out there that the board has conceptually approved but have not moved through the system to fruition yet. And we believe that we ought to give them that opportunity to do so.
And what is slowing them down through the process? Is there a bottleneck at the Department of State Architects?
Well, it's a complicated issue because if a school site is at the state that it probably qualifies for seismic mitigation, it also, in most cases, they're going to have to vacate the facility. And so in order to implement that at the district level, particularly in urban districts that are impacted by growth or by overcrowdedness, that's a very difficult and complex process. And I think that that's one of the reasons we've seen it be a little bit slower of a program for them to access, because at the local level they really have to move students out of those facilities usually before that work begins, and that's difficult.
And when did the more user-friendly process start?
2007.
2000. So it wasn't that recent then.
It's been
the construction eligibility to be able to move to all construction building 2 was in 2007, and the ground shaking requirement was removed as well.
You know, that seems problematic. I would assume the state superintendent is rather concerned about kids who aren't in earthquake-safe buildings, and it moves quickly up the priority scale and hundreds of kids get killed. So where's the problem? I ask again, is it state architects? Is it the LEAs?
Let me just tell you where. Step 1, which was the ability to come in with a preliminary assessment. We approved for eligibility 260 different buildings across the state. Step 2, when they come in with a much more detailed assessment, and that's their responsibility to do that, 99 came in and received approval to proceed in either 39 for replacement, total replacement of their buildings, and 60 for renovation or rehabilitation of their building. And from that 99 buildings, only 58 have come in for approval for final construction and move on with their project.
So if I can paraphrase, you're saying it's the LEA's fault or the Department of Education's fault?
I wouldn't say fault.
Okay, what would you say? We're talking about faults here.
Not seismic fault anyways.
Well, it could
be. They've come in, they've done their job, whether they have the funding to match it, whether they're working on their projects on their own, for whatever reasons they're choosing not to come in at this particular point. And we're not sure what that reason is. But it certainly, there's no backup at DSA right now, and we're ready and open to it. And
That's the important question. So it's not DSA.
We've got
So-
5 in there that are ready for approval, and they're not coming back to sign off their projects.
So what's going on?
So to clarify, the Department of Education does not allocate the dollars or select the project. That's the Office of Public School Construction. We have a small part of it at the very beginning of the process. I think what you see is a tension. Districts are anxious to basically admit that they have facilities that are potentially unsafe and not be sure whether they're going to get funding or not. So it's a tense situation that occurs with these dollars, which is why it's been difficult to get them out.
Okay, I had in my notes that Office of Public School Construction would be here. Are they here? Why don't you come forward and explain what's going on?